Once upon a time in Umuagu village, a scream cut through the quiet night like a blade tearing cloth. It was not a scream of fear, it was the cry of a woman pushing life into the world. At exactly 3 a.m., when the sky was supposed to be as dark as palm oil on old iron, something happened that Umuagu had never seen before. The moon, which should have been hiding behind thick clouds, suddenly shone brighter than it had ever shone in the history of the kingdom. It was so bright that the whole village looked like morning had already come. But morning had not come. It was the birth of a child that changed everything. Queen Nena of Umuagu had been in labor since the evening before. Her cries filled the palace and echoed into the village square. The nurses were tired, the midwives were sweating, and the king himself, King Odinibo, paced the palace like a man whose heart was being roasted on fire. For 7 long years he had prayed, offered sacrifices, and spoken to the gods through his priests. He had only one child, Prince Obina, but his spirit longed for another. He wanted a daughter, a princess who would carry beauty and peace into the kingdom. That fateful night, when hope seemed far away, the queen's final cry shook the room. Then came the cry of a newborn, a cry so soft yet so powerful that he felt like the wind itself bowed. At that exact moment, the moon flared in the sky like a flaming torch. In the entire kingdom of Umuagu, the cock crowed in surprise. Goats blinked at the sudden brightness, and villagers turned on their mats. People thought it was already dawn. Some even rushed outside with hoes, thinking it was time to go to the farm. What greeted them was a night that looked like day. The brightness was so strong that shadows disappeared. Children woke up, confused. Women whispered inside their huts. Men rubbed their eyes in shock. It was not ordinary moonlight. It was as if the sky wanted the kingdom to see something important, something divine. Meanwhile, in the palace, King Odinibo stood frozen. He stared through the open window at the glowing sky, then at the tiny baby in the midwife's arms. She had soft brown skin, curly black hair, and eyes that seemed to understand the world already. The midwives looked at her as if she was a gift that they had never seen in all their years of delivering babies. The head nurse swallowed hard and said, "Your Majesty, this child, she is special." The king nodded slowly. His mouth refused to move, but his soul danced. He took the baby gently, as if holding the moon itself. Her little fingers wrapped around his thumb, and he felt a strange warmth inside him. For the first time in many years, tears fell from his eyes. Queen Nena, exhausted but smiling weakly, whispered, "My king, we have a daughter." King Odinibo held the baby to his chest and whispered a name, Adaeze. Princess Adaeze. A daughter the gods had finally sent. Outside the palace, the villagers gathered. Even though it was still night, everyone stood as if morning had arrived. They murmured, pointed at the sky, and tried to understand the meaning of the brightness. Some elders shook their heads and tapped their walking sticks on the ground. Others prayed silently. A few wondered if it was a warning from the gods. But no one could deny the truth. Something powerful had happened in Umuagu. By sunrise, news had spread across the kingdom. People said the new princess had been born with blessings. Others whispered that she carried a sign from Chukwu himself. Many believed no ordinary child could command the moon to brighten the entire night. As the palace courtyard filled with joyful villagers, King Odenigbo sent a guard to the house of the village seer, Udoka. Udoka was not just any seer. He was the most respected spiritual eye in the whole of Imo State. Kings and chiefs from far villages sought his wisdom. He was a man who spoke rarely, but whenever he did, his words settled like truth. The guard rushed into the palace with him a short while later. Udoka had sharp eyes, long white hair that fell like cotton, and his staff decorated with cowries. When he stepped before the king, everyone went quiet. "Your Majesty, you have summoned me," Udoka said calmly. King Odenigbo inhaled deeply. "Udoka, you saw the sky. You saw what happened when my daughter was born. Tell me, why did the moon shine like that? Why did darkness flee at her arrival?" Udoka closed his eyes. The palace waited. Even the baby seemed calmer. Then he opened his eyes slowly. "The gods will reveal the reason at the right time." That was all he said. Nothing more. The king was not satisfied, but he could not question the seer. He simply nodded and allowed Udoka to leave. But his heart began to burn with curiosity. If the gods were involved, then something greater than he understood was at play. Days passed, and life in Umuagu changed. Ever since the princess was born, only beautiful things happened around the kingdom. Farmers harvested crops larger than they had planted. Sick people recovered faster than usual. Rain fell gently and at the right time. Marriages blossomed. Even traders who traveled outside the kingdom began returning with more profits than ever before. It was as if Adaize's birth had opened a door of blessings. Her relatives who lived far away, beyond rivers and forests, also noticed strange blessings. One of our uncles in Enugu said his business suddenly tripled. A cousin in Anambra, who had been barren for 10 years, became pregnant. Everyone connected to the king's family felt the change. The villagers talked every day. Some said the princess was a chosen one, others believed she would grow up to save the kingdom. But no one knew how, or when, or from what. Adaize grew like any other normal child would. She played with stones, chased chickens, cried when hungry, laughed with her brother Prince Obinna, and ran through the palace compound. The only difference was that she was a princess, a child with a birth surrounded by mystery. But as she grew older, the brightness of that birth night slowly faded from the minds of many villagers. Life returned to normal. People still respected her, but they stopped talking about the moon. They stopped wondering why darkness had bowed to a newborn. But the gods had not forgotten, and the sky had not forgotten. Something was coming. Years later, when Adaize became a beautiful young woman, she fell in love with a prince from a nearby kingdom called Ezeama. His name was Emeka, a brave and kind man who treated her like a queen even before marriage. Their love was strong, admired by both kingdoms. Their wedding was celebrated for 7 days. After marriage, Adaize moved to her husband's kingdom, but she visited Umuagu often. Prince Obinna became the crown prince of Umuagu, acting for their aging father in matters concerning the kingdom. He was strong and wise, respected by warriors and villagers alike. Everything seemed perfect. But perfection never lasts forever. One morning, many years after Adaize's birth, something strange happened. Something that shook the peace of Umuagu. Something that made old women whisper again. Something that forced the kingdom to remember that night of her birth. Something that only Princess Adaize could solve. And when she did, the whole village rejoiced again, praising the gods for sending them a princess whose light came from heaven itself. But before that moment of victory came, a darkness no one expected. A darkness that would test the kingdom. The trouble began on a quiet morning, the kind of morning that tricked villagers into thinking everything was normal. The sky was clear, the trees swayed gently, and the birds in Umuagu sang like nothing bad could ever happen. But under that peaceful silence, something dark was crawling toward the kingdom. Prince Obinna had woken early to attend a council meeting. The king, now old and fragile, rested more and spoke less, so Obinna handled most duties. He dressed in his royal cloth and stepped out of the palace, expecting to see the usual calmness of his people preparing for the day. Instead, he met fear.
Villagers were gathered in clusters, whispering. Children clung to their mothers. Men looked up at the sky with confusion on their faces. Obinna frowned. Something was wrong. He hurried to the square and found Chief Amiechi, the oldest chief in Umuagu, staring at the sky with shaking hands. Chief Amiechi, what is going on? Obinna asked. The elderly man turned slowly, as though his neck carried a heavy load. My prince, the sky, look! Obinna looked up. His heart skipped. The moon was in the sky, in broad daylight. It sat there like a giant white eye glaring down at the kingdom. The sun was shining normally, but the moon refused to disappear. It was like day and night were fighting for the same sky. No one had ever seen such a thing. Obinna felt something cold run down his spine. He had heard the stories of the night his sister Adaize was born. He remembered how the moon had shone like fire at 3 a.m. But this was not brightness. This was a warning. Before he could speak again, a loud cry rose from the far end of the village. It was Udoka, the village seer, hurrying toward the square with his staff in hand. His white hair blew wildly. His eyes were wide and red, as if he had seen something terrible. My prince, Udoka shouted, we must gather everyone. A sign has come. Obinna stepped forward. Udoka, what is happening? Why is the moon up there in the morning? Udoka did not answer immediately. He looked around at the villagers, then at the sky again. He dropped to one knee. The gods have warned me. Something ancient has awakened. Something dangerous. Fear spread like a wildfire. The villagers gasped. Women held their wrappers tightly around them. Men exchanged anxious glances. What danger? Obinna asked, his voice strong, despite the fear growing in his stomach. Udoka lifted his staff, pointing at the moon. This has happened only once before in our kingdom, on the morning Princess Adaize was born. But now the moon is not shining bright. It is watching, waiting, and it brings a message. There is a darkness rising, a darkness that seeks something precious from this land. Something or someone. Murmurs filled the air. Someone? Who? Why now? Obinna felt a tightness gripping his chest. Could this be connected to Adaize? The thought burned through him, but before he could speak, a group of palace guards rushed into the square. My prince, they shouted. The king has fainted. Obinna's eyes widened. He ran toward the palace, Udoka and the villagers close behind him. Inside the king's chambers, Queen Nena was crying softly as she held her husband's hand. King Odenigu lay unconscious on his royal bed. His chest rose and fell weakly. Obinna knelt beside him, shaking. Father, open your eyes. The king's eyelids fluttered. He tried to speak, but only one word escaped his lips. Adaize. Obinna froze. The queen covered her mouth. Udoka stepped closer. The king whispered again, his voice thin like fading smoke. Adaize, call her. Call Adaize. Then his eyes closed again.
Udoka placed a hand on Obinna's shoulder. The king has spoken. The princess is connected to what is happening. But Obinna already knew that. He could feel it. His sister's birth had shaken the sky. Now, something else was happening, and she was the key. Hours later, messengers rushed across forests, rivers, and farmlands to reach Ezeyama, where Adaize lived with her husband, King Emeka, of the neighboring kingdom. Back in Umuagu, the sky became stranger. Clouds moved backward. Animals became restless. Goats cried in the evening as if sensing danger. At nightfall, the moon turned pale red, but still refused to leave the sky. Fear grew in every home. And then something even worse happened. On the night Adaize was expected to return, a deep rumbling sound came from the forest near Umuagu. The ground trembled. Birds flew out in large flocks. Hunters ran back into the village shouting, "Something is in the forest! Something huge! Something we have never seen!" Villagers locked their doors.
Children were rushed inside. Even warriors shook as they grabbed their spears. Obina climbed onto a platform and shouted, "Everyone stay inside. Light your lamps. No one must go outside tonight." But deep inside him, he was worried. What if Adaevio arrived at the wrong time? What if whatever was in the forest crossed paths with her? He paced restlessly, waiting. Around midnight, a loud knock sounded at the palace gate. The guards opened it, and Princess Adaeze walked in. She wore a long wrapper tied with beads, her hair beautifully packed, and her face glowing gently despite her long journey. But something about her was different. Her eyes carried a strange calmness, almost like she knew something the rest of the world did not. Obina ran to her. "Adaeze, thank the gods you are safe." But before he could embrace her, she touched his shoulder lightly. The moment her hand rested there, the entire palace lights flickered, and the trembling in the forest stopped. Obina froze. Udoka, standing behind him, dropped his staff in shock. Princess Adaeze turned her gaze toward the sky. The red moon dimmed slightly, as though bowing to her. The queen rushed out and hugged her daughter tightly, crying into her neck, "My child, the king has been calling your name." Adaeze nodded softly. "Take me to him." Inside the king's room, she knelt beside her father. King Odenigbo opened his eyes slowly. When he saw her, tears escaped his old, tired eyes. "My daughter, you came." Adaeze held his hand. "I am here, Papa." The king looked weak, yet something like hope flickered in him. He turned to Udoka. "Now, tell her the truth." Udoka inhaled deeply. The room went silent. "Adaeze, the night you were born, the moon did not shine by accident. The gods placed their mark on you. You were born with a purpose, a great one. And now that purpose is calling you." Adaeze's heart pounded. "Purpose? What purpose?" Udoka stepped forward, his voice trembling. "There is an ancient spirit, a dangerous one, imprisoned in the forest many generations ago. It has awakened, and only you, only the child who shook the sky at birth, can stop what is coming." Adaeze stared at him. Obina swallowed hard. Queen Nena held her chest. King Odenigbo whispered, "My daughter, you were born for this moment." Outside, the wind howled suddenly, as if something powerful heard Udoka's words. Princess Adaeze felt a shiver run through her. Something deep inside her answered. It was a feeling she had never known, a calling that made her skin vibrate, a whisper that seemed to rise from her bones. She stood slowly. "What do I have to do?" Udoka opened his mouth to speak. But before he could say a single word, a loud roar came from the forest, a roar so fierce that the walls of the palace shook. Women screamed, men dropped their weapons. The moon turned red again, and the darkness that Umuagu feared finally arrived. The princess's journey had begun. The roar from the forest rolled through Umuagu like thunder searching for a heart to break. It was not the cry of any animal the kingdom had ever known. It was deep, ancient, and filled with a hunger that carried only one message. Something powerful had awakened. Princess Adaeze felt her chest tighten. She looked at Udoka, who was gripping his staff with trembling fingers. "Udoka, what is that? What have the gods allowed to rise?" Adaeze asked. Udoka swallowed hard. His voice was low and shaky. "The spirit of Nduka," The fallen guardian. The room fell silent. Even the king, weak as he was, squeezed Adaize's hand. Queen Nena covered her mouth. Prince Obina stood like a statue. Adaize frowned. Fallen guardian? I have never heard of such a spirit. Udoka stepped forward slowly. His eyes seemed older than usual. That is because the story was buried long ago. Many generations before you were born, Undoka was a powerful guardian spirit created by the gods to protect Umuagu and all nearby lands. But he hungered for more power. When the gods refused him, anger filled his heart and he turned against them. He was sealed deep inside the forest, bound by a spell that kept him asleep forever. Adaize's voice was quiet. So why is he awake? Udoka looked directly into her eyes. Because the gods knew one day a child would be born who could face him. A child marked by the moon. A child whose birth would change the sky. Adaize's heart beat faster. Me? Yes, Udoka whispered. The moon shone that night because it knew one day you would be the light against this darkness. Another roar shook the forest, closer this time. The palace walls trembled, lamps flickered, villagers outside began screaming and running for safety. Obina stepped forward. My sister cannot go out there alone. We must protect her. Udoka shook his head. The spirit did not rise to fight Umuagu. It rose to find her. If she hides, it will destroy everything to reach her. Adaize looked at the fear in her mother's eyes, the hope in her father's face, and the determination in her brother's posture. She felt something heavy settle on her shoulders, but it was not fear, it was destiny. I will face it, she said quietly. Queen Nena gasped. Adaize, no! The king, gathering every drop of strength left in him, whispered, My daughter, you are born for this. But remember, light only wins when it believes in itself. Adaize kissed his forehead. Then she turned and walked out. Outside the palace, the entire village of Umuagu was shaking with terror. Women held their children close. Warriors formed lines, though their hands shook. The moon glowed red above them, huge and heavy like a burning eye. As Adaize stepped into the open square, a wind blew so strongly that dust spiraled in circles around her feet. Her wrapper fluttered like wings of fire. The villagers gasped and parted, forming a path for her. Then, from the edge of the forest, the ground cracked. The trees bent, and a towering spirit emerged. It had the shape of a man, but its body was made of black smoke and swelling shadows. Red fire burned in its eyes. Each step it took made the earth groan. Adaize stood tall, her heartbeat matching the rhythm of the roaring wind. Undoka's massive head turned toward her. His voice echoed like stones grinding together. So, the moon child has come. His words made the villagers fall to their knees. Udoka clutched his staff tightly but did not interfere. Adaize stepped forward, her voice steady. Why do you threaten my people? Why have you risen? The spirit's eyes flamed brighter. I slept for centuries, waiting. The gods denied me power, but they gave it to you. I smell it in your blood, the light they hid in you. Give it to me. Let me take your power, and maybe I will spare your land. Adaize raised her chin. The gods did not give me power to hand it over. They gave it to me to protect my people. Unduka roared, shaking the sky. Then you will fall like the others. His shadowy hand reached out like lightning. Villagers screamed, warriors sprang forward, but the shadow pushed them back like dry leaves. The force rushed towards Adaeze, but the moment it touched her, something incredible happened. Light burst from her body. It was bright, white and pure, just like the night she was born. The entire village lit up as though the sun itself had descended. The shadow hand dissolved in the light. Undoka stumbled back, his smoky form flickering. Adaeze blinked in shock. She had never felt such energy before. It poured from her hands, her chest, her eyes. The moon above her shone brighter with every breath she took. Udoka shouted, "Princess, use it! Use the light within you!" Adaeze looked down at her glowing hands. She didn't know how to control the power, but something inside her did. The same force that made the moon shine the day she was born. She lifted her hands toward Undoka. Light swept forward like a blazing river. Undoka roared in pain as the light struck him. His shadowy form broke apart, swelling and twisting, but he fought back, sending waves of dark smoke towards Adaeze. She pushed harder. The darkness met the light in the middle of the field. The clash shook the entire kingdom. Dust rose, trees bent, buildings rattled. Villagers cried and prayed. Obina held their mother tightly. King Odenigbo forced himself to his feet, leaning on the doorway of the palace, watching with tears streaming from his eyes.
Adaze's legs trembled. Sweat covered her skin. The darkness pushed closer. Nduka laughed in a deep, rumbling voice. "You cannot win, child of light. Give up and let your power be mine." Adaze closed her eyes. In that moment, she remembered her father's words. Light only wins when it believes in itself. She remembered the bright night she was born, the blessings that followed, the love of her family, and the hopes of her people. She opened her eyes again. This time, they glowed like stars. "No," she whispered, "I will not give you anything." She gathered every bit of power inside her and pushed. The light exploded outward like a storm. It swallowed the smoke. It wrapped around Nduka's body, tearing him apart piece by piece. The spirit screamed as his dark form dissolved into the brightness. Then suddenly, everything went silent. The light faded gently into the air. The moon slowly returned to its normal color. Nduka was gone. The villagers held their breath. Then someone shouted, "The princess has saved us!" The square erupted with cries of joy. Women danced, men jumped, children laughed and clapped. Even the wind seemed to sing. Udoka fell to his knees, raising his staff to the sky. "It is done. The prophecy is fulfilled." Obina ran to his sister and hugged her tightly. "Adaze, you have saved Umuagu." Queen Nena cried tears of pride. King Odenigbo, leaning on Prince Emeka, who had arrived just in time to witness the victory, smiled with the peace of a man whose heart was complete. Princess Adaze looked around at her people, her kingdom, her family. The moon glowed softly above her, as if bowing in respect. That day, Umuagu rejoiced. They celebrated her victory for 7 days, just like her wedding. Songs were written about her. Children were named after her. People from far kingdoms traveled just to hear the story of the princess whose birth brought brightness to the world. And the mystery of the night she was born was finally understood. The moon had shone bright not just to welcome her. It had shone to announce her destiny. Princess Adaze, the daughter of light, the one who saved the kingdom, and the blessing the gods sent to Umuagu,